Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Keep It Science. We are back and with a bit of a twist. This time we are shining a light on rare diseases, from insights from biotech leaders and specialist clinicians to personal stories from the people impacted the most. Now, we say rare, but over 300 million people live with rare diseases. That's roughly about 1 in 20 people face years of diagnostic journeys with limited treatment options and struggle with diseases for the rest of their lives due to a lack of a cure.
I'm Dr Elisabeth Kugler, and for me this season is incredibly personal. I have myself a rare autoimmune disease, which includes scleroderma, dermatomyositis, and secondary Raynaud's, which is called an overlap disease. And so as a scientist and rare disease patient, I hope to contribute insights from both of these worlds in this season.
And I'm Dr Nick Gorn, and together with Elisabeth and a variety of guests, we'll explore everything in rare diseases, the science, the stories, the struggles, and most importantly, these exciting breakthroughs that we're seeing every single day.
Hello and welcome to today's episode, When Muscles Are Chronically Inflamed, the Rare Disease Myositis. Myositis is a group of rare autoimmune conditions where the body's immune system attacks the muscles and also other organs such as the skin, lungs and heart. And myositis is a rare disease affecting up to 2 million people globally, which is about 0.022% of the global population. I have myself an overlap of scleroderma and dermatomyositis. And so for me, some of the main symptoms are really pain, muscle weakness, fatigue, GI issues, and difficulty swallowing. But every patient is very, very different, and the patient journey and how we're impacted by myositis can be profound. From limiting mobility to taking independence completely, and from issues swallowing to reducing the quality of life, there's really a whole range of how myositis can impact patients. And so in this episode, we'll explore myositis via the lens of lived experience, which we are always very excited about, and take a look at the current research. And today I won't be doing this alone. I will be doing this with our fabulous guest, Dr. Karen Cheng, a globally recognized patient advocate and leader in the rare disease community with a particular focus on myositis or idiopathic inflammatory myopathies, which is a word or a mouthful to say. So I'm very proud I got through this one. So Karen has a lived experience with myositis, and she has lived with it for nearly 2 decades. And she has become a powerful voice, bringing patients, clinicians, and researchers together. She works with multiple international organizations, including the International Myositis Society and the Myositis International Health and Research Alliance, MIHRA. And she also contributes in EULA, which is the European Alliance of Associations for Rheumatology, which was formerly known as the European League Against Rheumatism. Within EULA, she works in a PARE group, which is a network of people with arthritis and rheumatism in Europe. And within this EULA PARE group, she ensures that the voices of people with rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases, or RMDs, are heard and have the influence among the decision makers in Europe. And so she's also a patient advocate in the European Reference Network, or EIN, for the Euro NMD and ReConnect initiatives to improve care for neuromuscular and rare connective tissue, as well as musculoskeletal diseases. And so through her network and through her really fantastic work, Karen champions patient advocacy and research involvement. She drives awareness campaigns and she accelerates clinical innovation across the board. So big welcome to you, Karen.
Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, also kudos to you for living and speaking about your own condition. So this is also really great to meet you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so lovely to speak someone who can speak to their lived experience, but also the research going on, and someone so tightly involved in all these fantastic networks. And so obviously first we want to set the scene a little bit to our listeners who might not really know a lot about myositis and kind of what generally the condition symptoms are. So maybe you could give us a brief introduction about what is myositis.
So myositis is really a group of rare conditions, as you mentioned already. This is really primarily characterized by immune-mediated muscle inflammation and weakness. When I say immune-mediated, it really is referring to the immune system that we all have, which for whatever reason turns against ourselves. And it affects, very specific muscle groups. That's the unique thing about this disease. It affects core muscles. So the muscles that, help us to stand and to walk. And mostly, the muscles that are close to the center of our body. There is one particular subtype in myositis, which also affects muscles a bit further away, or what we call the distal muscles. So in muscles that go towards the wrists and the hands. It's a very a big group of diseases, and also the muscles are not only affected, the other organs such as the skin and heart and lungs, and in some patients, also like yourself and myself, we have overlapping autoimmune conditions. Today there are 6 main types of myositis. I'm just going to read through some of them that are the most commonly talked about. So dermatomyositis, or DM, and antisynthetase syndrome, or some people abbreviate it as ASyS. Immune-mediated necrotizing myopathy, this is the type that I specifically have, or IMNM. Inclusion body myositis, or IBM. Overlap myositis, which is the type you have, Elisabeth. And there's also the last, or the 6th one, is actually a new kid on the block. It's immune checkpoint-induced myositis. So this is the myositis that we see in patients who are undergoing treatment for cancer. And due to the specific type of cancer therapy they have, it can sometimes induce autoimmune conditions such as myositis, but also we have seen patients with myasthenia gravis, which is another type of autoimmune disease caused by immune checkpoint inhibitors. So there is a growing number of studies and research groups who have looked into the different subtypes and the autoantibodies which exist in all these different subtypes. And there are autoantibodies that we haven't discovered yet. So many patients are, for example, in the IMNM group, there are seronegative patients. So we don't know what type they have. I think it's still very important that if a patient is, diagnosed with myositis, it's important to try and find the autoantibody, because it helps to better classify the patients. And also, because of the classifications and the available evidence that we have today, there are certain subtypes that may respond better to some treatments. So I think it's important that we know. Some of you who are listening and who are familiar with myositis may be wondering, why am I not mentioning polymyositis, or PM? And why this is not in the 6 main subtypes that I've mentioned above. So back in the 2000s, when I was diagnosed, there were only 3 types, PM, DM, or IBM, because I didn't have skin symptoms, and I wasn't of a particular age group, which IBM patients belong to. So I only had muscle issues. And so I was given a diagnosis of PM. But I really believe that today, due to the discovery of all these different subtypes, I'm really working very hard with myositis experts around the world and also patient groups. I do believe that PM actually does not really exist anymore, or perhaps it should not exist anymore, because what we know today about PM and how the patients who were originally diagnosed with PM, like myself, we are now reclassified into many of the different types that we're now more aware of. And I think it's important for the community to come to a consensus about this, if possible, for the sake of the patients.
Thank you so much for this fantastic overview. And you already brought up so many interesting points. I've been taking notes on the side here. So one of them is obviously that sometimes, or antibodies are a great tool to classify, but sometimes they do not show up, or they might not show up for a while. Like for myself, I didn't show up any antibodies for like 2-3 years, and then I finally showed up something. So it can be very difficult. But also, as you say, that there's so much research that is being done, but still there's so many changes. So sometimes due to the research and the new things that we learn, the terminology changes, the classification changes, but also the way we diagnose can change. So I think it's really interesting that you bring in this whole experience of like 20 years of diagnosis to say, when you got diagnosed initially, things have been very different. And so even in the last 20 years, there has been so much work done that is really amazing and gives a lot of hope for patients to see a lot of work is being done. It sometimes is slow and Yes, but it is being done, and that is really, really great. But because you bring in all this experience, we really wanted to take this opportunity to really hear about your story, and if you can take us on your journey of living with myositis, because for us, it's the most inspiring to hear from people who have lived with the disease, have overcome it, and now really make space for other people. And now you're obviously a global advocate for the rare disease community. So maybe you can speak with us about how you derived here from your initial diagnosis to now become a global advocate.
Wow. I'm not sure I can do 20 years of history, but I'll try my best. So it took me 18 years to actually find my autoantibody, and I'll tell you how I did that actually. When I was diagnosed in Singapore in 2006, I would say the majority of my symptoms came on pretty hard and fast in the last 4 to 6 weeks before my actual diagnosis. But if I think back, I probably had the very first symptom about 6 months before I actually was told that I had PM. And this was really because I noticed some weakness, and I had been a very ultra fit person. I did long distance running. I did a lot of rock climbing, scuba diving. I was living in Malaysia at that time, and you can imagine, very active outdoors. I did move to Singapore shortly before my diagnosis, about 2 months before. And I was practicing, so I'm an oral surgeon by training, and I was practicing in one of the clinics of a big hospital group. My clinic was on the 3rd floor of that medical center. I never felt any trouble at all. In fact, it was just very normal for me to walk up the 3 floors, even if I was wearing heels. And I started to notice I took the lift. And it really hit me one day, why are you taking the lift? And I noticed also that I couldn't run after a bus, or it just felt like it was really strange to be walking fast as I would normally do. And I had difficulty changing my clothes. I noticed I was buckling my bra in front and then spinning it around, which was kind of strange. And then the final thing that took me to the hospital was really inability to take my own legs out of a car. I could drive the car, but for some reason I opened the door and my brain was telling my body, legs go out as you do. Nothing happened. Thankfully, I was with a friend and we went to the hospital immediately. And after about a week of tests, and this was already early December of that year in 2006. And I had bloods, I had lots of imaging. I had a sectional biopsy taken out of my leg, so about a 2-inch block of muscle. And I was awake for that. I wouldn't recommend that. And the diagnosis really came, we knew that it could be one of 3 things, but it was very much likely to be PM. I was sent home on oral tablets, so steroids, and a drug called methotrexate, which is commonly used in patients with rheumatic conditions. But I continued to deteriorate despite being medicated. And at that time in Singapore, I had moved back with my parents as well. And on Christmas morning that year, I literally could not get myself out of bed. I couldn't turn, I couldn't pull myself. I had to yell to someone in the house, please come and get me because I'm stuck. So this prompted me to go back to the hospital after 3 weeks of being at home and not getting better. And when I returned to the hospital, I actually went to a different hospital. So I went to the university hospital for the first time. And during the 3 weeks that I was at home and resting, I did a little bit more research, and I found that the city hospital, or Tan Tock Seng Hospital in Singapore, actually had physicians who had some experience in looking after myositis patients. Immediately, I was taken in to the ward. I was given, strong IV steroids. I was also, told at that time that they were not sure, if I could ever walk again. I think that was pretty scary. I was wheelchair bound. I was bed bound. I needed, to function in some way in the hospital to be able to take in what was being told to me. And I stayed in that hospital from Boxing Day 2006 till 2007, April the 15th, before I actually discharged myself. Actually, I requested to be let out. And it was important for me because I realized in the hospital I wasn't able to do the things that I needed to do by myself in my own natural surroundings, you know. So the little things that you do at home that you may not think it's a big deal, like going to the toilet, showering yourself, taking care of your own meals. I wanted to go home to force myself to do those things so that I could return to a normal state faster. I had also the chance to hire a helper. So in Singapore, it was much more convenient in that way that you could hire a helper from one of the regional countries. And we trained this person to help to transfer me from the bed to the wheelchair to the toilet. I even returned to work shortly after in May. I did say to my manager at that time, I would like to come back and do something. I'm going crazy here. And because it was a big hospital group, I could go back and do a desk job, essentially looking after some restructuring projects for the clinic. So I started my career pivot working in this hospital group. I didn't really have this. I did not have the skills for this, to be very honest. I had no financial training, no management training. I had to force myself to do an MBA. And as I was recovering, I learned a little bit more about healthcare management. And I managed to get hired by a international medical device company, and that's the reason why I'm here now in Switzerland. They did send me to Tokyo as my first project. And maybe this is something also that I, was very honest with the hiring manager from the very start to say, look, I have this condition. I may look very normal. I don't know at what point, I might be back in a wheelchair or I'm just unable to carry out, my job. And I don't think they really understood that. I remember a conversation with the HR director before I left Singapore, and she said to me, "Hey, we can't cover you for life insurance. That you got rejected." And I said, "Well, I don't really care about the life insurance. My dependents are independent, but I would really like for you to cover my health insurance because this is the thing that really, has a high level of concern for me." Because going to a foreign country, not knowing their healthcare system and whether or not the drugs or the tests that I may or may not need would be covered. Having a rare disease can be very expensive. I learned that as well because I had a stipend for my healthcare coverage in Singapore, and that completely was depleted in a week. So I had, thankfully, a very good healthcare coverage when I moved to Tokyo. I was able to go to Johns Hopkins in Tokyo and see a rheumatologist who actually had some experience in myositis. And then the next project that I had required me to go to the US. Made me a little bit nervous because I was by that time already in touch with some people in the US living with myositis, and some of them had said to me they had difficulties, navigating the insurance coverage. But thankfully, this particular coverage was very good, and I could go to Harvard University when I was working in Boston. I had a very good team there that looked after everything, all the different disciplines that I needed to be looked after. And I finally decided to base myself in Switzerland because of the healthcare system and also because of the ease of access to my medical team here. As well as there is a special clause in the Swiss healthcare articles of law that allows coverage for off-label drugs when you do have a rare disease that it does not have an indicated treatment. So for the first 10 years, I would say in my journey as a patient, I was fully concentrated on, managing my own life, rebuilding that life again, having my career put as a priority first. And I would say within the last 10 years, I got a bit more involved because also partly because I did a second pivot in my career from working in the oral implant industry to moving into pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical devices, because I think, it's so important for someone who has lived a rare disease to actually work in the industry. I think people like us bring, insights that you could not really gather from just talking to a person. I think we have a special instinct to think about some things. And I was inclined to work in rare diseases. Having been through, my career started really in medicine. I was training at the hospital in Liverpool in the UK. And I actually treated patients who had very complex medical conditions. And then I pivoted to the pharmaceutical industry, where I was able to work with physicians, researchers, and also with patient organizations in several different disciplines in hematology and oncology, and mostly in neurology and rheumatology and immune-mediated rare diseases. So I started to pay a bit more attention to what was going on also in my own disease. I attended the first GCOM, or the Global Conference on Myositis, in Berlin, in Germany, in 2019. And then I was also very surprised, very excited, really, that, the number of people at a conference for a very rare disease, and also working on finding, new ways and what is this disease really doing? So mechanisms of the disease and all the different subtypes. And in the recent years, I've been through four now, 4 GCOMs. And every time I go, I always learn something else, and I always meet new people. So it's really exciting to see this space develop so quickly. And, how I actually came to the diagnosis that I currently have was actually by serendipitous chance, in the sense that I had a heart problem, and that triggered me to look for my real diagnosis. But this was already 7 years after the initial discussion with the doctors about what I had. So this time in the GCOM that's happening next month in Lisbon, I will be sharing about this perspective about finding your correct diagnosis. And also at the EULAR Congress in June, which is taking place in London, I will be speaking a little bit more about navigating as a patient in a rare space.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And you've brought in so many different perspectives and points. I think something that a lot of us patients can relate to is like this very fast decline of your health and the things that you can do. It was very similar for myself. Not being able to walk up the stairs to the lab, or like you say, issues dressing, and you're just like, there's something not quite right, or you're trying to lift a suitcase and you're suddenly like, this feels heavier than usual, or these little points, and then it kind of adds up. And for me, it was also similar. Like when I had one flare with dermatomyositis, I literally couldn't walk within 6 hours. I couldn't move anything, and then by midnight I could move nothing except for my little finger, and I felt never so mortified and desperate and helpless, because I was like, what is this, and what is happening? And like you say, the doctors then come in and they're like, they don't know what this is. They don't know if this is going to persist or not. And you're in a lot of pain at the time. And it's a very, very difficult situation. And I think that's a very scary thing, that you sometimes decline so very fast. But then also, like you say, then you spend a lot of time in hospital. And at some point you're like, how can I claw back a little bit of my life? How can I it's very inspirational that you went back to work. But as you say, you had to career pivot because you couldn't do the things that you trained to do initially. So it's quite interesting to see this difference. Another thing that you also mentioned is obviously life insurance and health insurance, which is something I think is really challenging. And I think healthy people have no idea how difficult it is to maneuver this whole insurance and financial system when you're being ill, especially if you want to move country. It is very, very difficult. And most of the time, rare disease patients are just told you can't get insurance, or if you want to get insurance, it's so expensive that a normal person cannot afford it. So there's definitely also this financial burden that is not often enough talked about. I think also what was very interesting is obviously that you self-discharged after about 4 months to kind of say you want to retrain, you want to redo things. But I wonder also, obviously, there must have been a lot of work in terms of like physiotherapy and rebuilding strength and a lot of work in there that probably has never been told about. So I wonder, maybe very briefly, can you talk with us about like how you retrained yourself, like in terms of physiotherapy or occupational therapy, to really rebuild that strength?
Well, I was very fortunate. I was in a very good hospital. So even from the first day of admission, I was already given the opportunity to talk to a physiotherapist. In fact, there were 3 people that were assigned to me: an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist, as well as a psychologist. So it's very important as well, because you do need the mental strength to train yourself, because you're not used to your body not listening to you. And there were many instances where I felt like, why am I even bothering? I would say that the physiotherapy side of things, you don't look at day-to-day changes. I know you mentioned that you had deterioration that happened even within a couple of hours. What I have experienced in my last 20 years, I've had 2 major flares, and I call them Procker flares, which required me to go back to crutches. And crutches was as bad as I got. It was very quick to get to the crutches stage, I would say within a few weeks. And then it would take another 6 months to throw the crutches or put the crutches back into the storeroom. And this is the reason why, because the inflammation in myositis, when it is severe, it's literally, when I speak to a patient sometimes and it's difficult to explain to them what's happening, some of them understand it a little bit more when I just say, look, it's your immune cells that are eating away at your muscles, if I could put that in the most simplistic term. And the attack on these muscles is a lot quicker than it is to try and, first of all, control that inflammation with whatever drugs that we can get hold of. And then when the inflammation is controlled, only then can you build your muscle. It's very difficult to build muscle when it's getting attacked at the same time. So this time lag, it's extremely important as well to realize that as a patient, and also for physicians and other healthcare professionals to understand about the lag. I really believed that me going home and me forcing myself to go back to work 1 day at a time, I started with 1 day and then I added more days every week. I think that was absolutely crucial in my recovery. I think if I had continued to stay in the hospital, continued to allow the nurses to do everything for me, my recovery would have taken longer. I had to really force myself to, think about what it's going to take me to get back to normal, and also to accept that the improvements in PT was not day to day, but it was more month to month. So last month I couldn't do that. Today I can do this. Yay. What's the next thing you want to do?
Couldn't agree more, especially like also that it just takes so long. And I also feel like every time you go back to physiotherapy, you feel almost like you're starting from zero. But then you look back a month and you're like, oh no, last month I wasn't able to do this, or I was 2 minutes shorter, or whatever it is. So absolutely agree. And it was very similar for me. I didn't stop work. I completely changed work, and I worked reduced hours, etc. But for me, it was similar. I thought, like, for me, work is something that I wanted to cling to and kind of needed to stay sane, because already everything else changed around this disease and being ill. And I felt like I need this little bit of normality almost to kind of feel something to cling to, because otherwise 100% it's just going to be about being ill, treatment, medication, etc. So I totally agree. It is really important to have something also to to shift perspective. Sometimes that's really, really important. But also one thing that you mentioned before is obviously you moved countries, and that is something that is, I think, very challenging. I think anyone who kind of moves countries is already facing, challenges in terms of like clinical care or kind of any medication or treatment. But for you, it was, in addition to the clinical care, it's obviously also navigating the whole research landscapes and kind of the advocacy work that you do. So maybe you can speak to us a little bit about your experience working across different countries.
I did not know, actually, when I was signed up to this job, that I would be moving across continents. Let's just say that I took the job because I was really excited about, going back to work, and it was an interesting position for me. But when they first told me about Japan, I really was quite shocked, because I was like, hey, I look Japanese, but I don't speak any Japanese. Do the people there speak enough English for me to get, through this? And speaking to the doctors there was not a problem. I think even when I moved to Switzerland, and I'm in the German-speaking part of Switzerland, and that also was not a problem. But of course, there are some challenges when you, for example, need to call to change your appointment or something like that. That was a struggle when I first got here. I work with people from, I don't know, Australia all the way to the West Coast of the US. Also in my professional work, because I worked as a global medical director in several pharmaceutical companies. So I also have to think about all the different time zones and the different cultures and different ways of communicating to people. It is an extra, it's an additional work on top of the work that you already have to do. But I think it's very rewarding when you do actually see the results of this. There is still so much to do, Elisabeth. We have many patients. We have about 18 different patient organizations who are specifically focusing also on myositis. Many of these myositis working groups within a country is under a bigger umbrella of, a national organization of rheumatic conditions. So even within this more organized countries, we already struggle with resources and training and making the small indication of myositis to be heard. But there's still so many other countries that we don't reach. I struggled to reach countries in Africa. I have been approached by patients in Africa through social media. Please help us. There's no organization there. Language is also a barrier. Countries that are in what I call the low middle income group. And there's still many, even in Europe, that do not have the resources to support patients living with this. So many of the patients in these countries, and some of them are not even diagnosed, they're still being, pushed through the system with different referrals. And yourself and myself, the experience that we have, and even the difficulties that we face, is in nowhere comparable to some of these countries, And I think this is part of the work that I'm, really enjoying, is also working with people from different places, because their ecosystem there, or their immediate environment, is so different from mine. I'm learning all the time what challenges they're facing, and insurance is not even a thing in some countries. They pay out of pocket, or they depend on the government system, which is what I also faced in Singapore, because I didn't have insurance, and it was a state-funded healthcare system. In the UK, as you imagine, you also have the NHS, but every country has its very specific modalities, to be able to help a patient or not help a patient. And I think this is what is important in advocacy work. First of all, to get the patient diagnosed as fast as possible. Without the diagnosis, we don't get the treatment, or even with the diagnosis, we still don't get the treatment. But it's also important to educate this, the patients within the patient groups are already very educated, but many patients do not even know that they can reach out to other patients or other patient groups, either in their country or internationally. But we are connected by the internet, so my hope is that we will be able to solve this problem, over the next years.
Yes, yes. And it's so important that you bring it in that we are very fortunate in that position that we are to have that healthcare system, having diagnosis, having access to treatments, having also access to different treatment. If one doesn't work, we can try another one, which is a luxury that a lot of patients don't have. And as you say, I think it's not just the infrastructure, it's also having doctors who have that experience with specific patients, because if the doctors don't have that specific experience, they might not see certain patterns or some reactions or how you respond to certain treatment, etc. So you need those doctors with that experience, absolutely. But I think it's also one thing that you mentioned, and I think that's always key, is bringing together people with different perspectives and cultures and backgrounds. So these could be clinicians or scientists or pharma or patients. It's about bringing people together. And I think that's what you do amazingly with all your work across the board with like the International Myositis Association, with EULA, with MIHRA. So you're really trying to connect all the dots. Like you say, there's so many different associations. So maybe you can talk with us about how these platforms really shape the patient experience.
Well, like you said, the experts are out there. They're all working with each other in all their different, specialty areas. I think it's not only important to share and disseminate the information between the groups, because so much is going on. It's very hard to keep up sometimes, and even the professionals themselves struggle to keep up. So that's why we do have conferences like the GCOM. Most of the experts in myositis are not just treating myositis only. So there are many different conditions in the space that they work. So it's important to share as patient advocates and in these conferences and meetings, or even in any kind of touch point that we have. I talk to nurses, I talk to people in the market, just to add a bit more value and motivation to these people who are working in the condition, first of all, and then also to inform the others who are not working specifically in myositis, that this exists, and what we feel as patients. So I think all the different groups, IMIOS, EULAR, MIRA, EBMT, and EBMT is only a recently partner, a recent partner in this space because of a very innovative type of treatment that has been used in autoimmune diseases recently. It's to do with CAR-based therapies. And this really came from oncology. So the hematologists and the oncologists had started this decades before the autoimmune experts have even thought about it. So I personally love to bring these different groups together, because I think it's important for the communication to happen, because only by communicating we can align, all the different developments that are going on, and we can try to avoid duplication. And collaborating, always brings a better outcome than if we worked in silos. So we have different patient groups in different countries as well, which is very important, because a certain country might be very good in a specific thing, and they had already spent years developing expertise. So it's just important that all the patient groups as well talk to each other, so that we understand where in our specific groups we can help each other.
Yeah, and I think it's also about like where you are in the journey. I think that is also really, really important. I remember like at the very start, I think everyone's just overwhelmed, because suddenly your whole life changes to being 100% about your disease and about the things that you cannot do, and how things are not working, and how unwell you are, and about treatments, etc. And then over time, you kind of, after diagnosis and almost shock, really, you kind of come to terms with it. And then I think it takes probably a few years to actually start dealing with all of this and putting systems in place and functioning and kind of living with this disease or around this disease however well you can. And I think that's also always the thing, like if people want to ask like, what's your one best advice, or like, what's your one point of hope? But I think it's also really important to think about those who are currently at their worst, because I think they probably don't see hope. At the moment, they probably see despair and helplessness and like, oh my God, how did she go from being in a wheelchair to actually hiking again? Or we also didn't even speak about your pilot's license, right? You're doing amazing stuff. And so I think maybe in a few words, can you just, give some advice for those who are currently going through the worst?
Well, even the worst that I have been through may not be someone else's worst. So my worst was probably the time that I was in hospital being completely stuck in bed. And I had to be flipped, to avoid getting bed sores. That for me was the worst because I couldn't do even very basic things like going to the toilet on myself. It's things that a healthy person takes for granted every day, which I no longer take for granted. And I did wonder, that time when you're spending time in a hospital, being in a very solitary place, I wondered if life was going to get any better. But I think the one thing that myositis has taught me is really patience. Patience in patience is not an easy thing because, as a patient, you just think, oh, just give me the drug and take it and then things will bounce back, and it's one of the biggest lessons really. And I still struggle with this today because I'm type A personality and I'm a doer and a giver and I want to get things done and I want things to move forwards. But I realized that I also have to mind my own needs. So if there's a time to rest and there's a time to stop, I need to pay attention to that. My best advice for anyone, I think, going through this, or not even myositis, it could be any disease, is that it's okay to feel frustrated. Today you feel frustrated, but use the time that you're feeling frustrated to maybe think about learning something, learning more about yourself or learning more about what you have. Because I think during my journey, the more I learned about what I had and the things that could or could not happen, the more it helped me to help the people that are supposed to be helping me. Because it being a rare disease, they don't have as much experience as yourself. And you being the patient, you are your best advocate, you are your best medical record keeper, and you are the best person to tell your physicians or any other healthcare professional how you are feeling. Through every stage of my recovery and then my sort of onward journey, I tried to celebrate the small wins. So like the win of, I don't know, today I can lift my toothbrush into my mouth to brush my teeth. Maybe the next week or the week after, I want to raise my hairbrush high enough to brush my own hair. So these are the little steps that you have to kind of set yourself, celebrate the small wins and then give yourself a bigger target. And then, all these small steps kind of add up to bigger things. I did not imagine that I would be here today doing what I'm doing. There were no plans. Switzerland was not in the plan. I never even thought about the country. Working in the pharmaceutical industry was certainly something I never, ever wanted to do when I was training to be a physician myself. But here I am. Hiking is still something that I would love to do. I did do some hikes in the last 10 years. I have to say I was much stronger 10 years ago than I am today. So part of the reason why I started to learn to be a pilot was because I live in a country with these massive mountains that are beautiful and I can't climb them. So the only thing that I could do was to fly over them or fly through them. And that took another level of resilience from me because I didn't think I could do it. The first step was even just to get the medical certificate because I sent all my papers in and the FAA of Switzerland just said, nope. And, it's just one fight after the other. And I think many patients are at the stage where they're struggling because they can't see into the future. But, my advice is don't see too far ahead. Just see, week by week, month by month, deal with that one stage at a time, and the future will come.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because it also puts things so much into perspective about how far we've come. Like you say, being able to wash your own hair, to lift a toothbrush, to lift it for 2 minutes and without being shaky and sweaty and kind of needing to lay down after that, or even being able to get out of your pajamas. These things are real struggles, and it is amazing to see how far we've both have come. And I'm Austrian myself, so I love the mountains, and I hope one day I'll fly with you over the mountaintops again.
Absolutely.
That would be fabulous. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Karen. Unfortunately, this is really all that we have time for today. I could talk with you about for everything and for ages. It's so great. So thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you very much as well for this invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And so thank you so much to all our listeners for joining us for this fabulous episode of Keep It Science. Today we spoke about myositis and how it affects patients and why patient voices are so crucial in shaping research in healthcare. So if you have enjoyed this episode and it has inspired you, please do make sure to share it with someone who might benefit or might be interested into this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a conversation, and we'll put all the links to all the associations into the description, and we'll make sure to tag everyone along the way on social media. And so until next time, keep it science. Thank you so much.
This podcast was produced by Keep It Science, a collaboration between Acorn Scientific Marketing and Zeke's Art for Geeks, two award-winning science communication and marketing agencies based in the UK. If you enjoyed the episode and you're thinking about launching your own podcast, whether it's to share some expert insights, tell your company's story, or build market presence, we'd absolutely love to help you create a podcast with outstanding science and production quality.
Drop us a line at keepitscience@gmail.com, find us on LinkedIn, and if nothing else, keep it science.